All right, man. Another Saturday sesh, another deep pod. We're going to get into it for folks today. Very, very common question we see at all levels of a tech sales career, I might add. Is tech sales still worth it in 2024? Certainly, we've made a lot of content in the past about breaking in, but I also know, peers, etc., not calling anyone out directly, a lot of people get 3 to 5 to 7 years into tech sales, and for many different and valid reasons, I might add, feel burnt out, question if it's the long-term path for them. So we're going to look at it from multiple different angles. And one last thing before I kick it over to you too is also, Chris and I both have had separate careers and kind of lives before this, both athletic, also in different careers or in entrepreneurial endeavors. So I think one thing that's lost, especially for that person that maybe sales is the only thing they've ever done and known, is also good and bad. What are the alternatives? I think when you're really burnt out, when you're really questioning if tech sales might be for you, everything always looks better. Hey, yeah, if I could just, clock in and clock out on a simple job and make $75K a year, I would do that, and so many examples we'll get into, but Chris, I'll get your thoughts before we start to kick it off.
Yeah, no, I think this will be a really good one. And I think the unfortunate reality of everything on social media, on YouTube, is that the doom and gloom stories always get the most attention. And so, there has been like a very much so like rising tendency of creators, of people just like asking the question of like, is the SDR role dead? Like, is tech sales going under? Like, is it a broken career? Just things like this that I think personally is just very, very flawed. Like, I think tech sales is in a really good spot, especially considering like when you look at other fields, adjacent fields. I still think tech sales is a huge opportunity. I actually think, I don't want to say necessarily that it's a bigger opportunity. I think it's just the same. Yeah. But for people to go out there and say that like the tech sales run is over is ridiculous. We've had like 7 people land jobs this week. Like several of them have landed 6-figure jobs with no previous experience. So it's like, that's just like, I'm sorry, but like it's a pile of BS. Like it's still very much so possible. There's still a lot of upward mobility happening in tech sales. So anyway, I'll let you kind of break down the subjects, but this will be a good one.
Yeah, for sure. And for anyone watching or listening on Spotify, we do have timestamps as well. So feel free to jump around, but the major points we're going to hit on today, I think starting with the most obvious, or I would say common question, like, is it impossible to break in? I know you started to talk about it. We'll definitely break that down. What happens if you don't like tech sales once you break in? That's a common concern for people maybe a year or two in, or also people maybe considering leaving like a cushy, comfortable job. Well, what happens if I do that, but I don't like it, right? That's a very, very common one. We'll talk about the economy, its impacts on tech sales. Also, tech sales versus other fields, because we have lived this. I think I will definitely share a lot about my engineering experiences in a desk job, et cetera, et cetera. Also, I think what people think of sales in terms of, there's a lot of people concerned like, well, if will I be like the slimy salesperson, the reputation? We certainly worked with people that are almost like embarrassed on their LinkedIn profile. They're not putting SDR because they came from a prestigious background. So we'll talk about that. And then also, some of the pros and cons or maybe differences when it comes to networking opportunities. And I think kind of parlaying this into some of the things that if you're not in the industry, or maybe you're taking these things for granted because you're burnt out, the advantages that you have potentially in a career like this versus others. But bringing it back, timestamps again if you want to jump around. So is it impossible to break into tech sales today? What are your thoughts?
No, absolutely not. I think it's very much so still just kind of going off of what I was saying earlier, I think that there's been a huge kind of weed out of the people that weren't serious about this stuff. And so it's funny when people say that it's like over and that there aren't as many jobs being posted. Like, sure, that might be true, but there's also way less people that aren't really like, in the mix for these different roles now. So like what we've seen, coincidentally, is that people are getting more and more jobs when it pertains to like our students. And it's not like we've had a lot of growth with higher levels, but the interesting aspect of it is there's more and more people getting jobs. And so I think if you're doing the right things, if you're putting in the work, which is like the most vanilla thing ever, but like if you are actually doing the right things, you still have, I would say, the same amount of opportunity to break into tech sales. I think that people out there are really good at making excuses for why they haven't broken in. Yeah. And so they'll always be the first to blame the economy, to blame anything under the sun really that isn't related to like their own performance or the amount of time that they're putting into this. Definitely. So I would say 100%. It's a no-brainer that like, and just look at people that are breaking in, right? Like if you look at like one person that's like breaking in like once every single month, but and I'm not just saying our course or our platform, like if you just go on LinkedIn and you search for sales development representative, you can do this for all of the top cloud companies in the world and just look at all the people that are breaking in, right? Like the proof is in the pudding. So anyway, I'll throw it over to you. But
yeah, for sure. And I think something we'll kind of talk about too on the economy is like, sure, there are definitely ebbs and flows and times where companies are hiring more than not. But to your point, I think the craziness of a year or two is gone, year or two ago. But a lot of those people have thinned out. And also, again, while maybe, sure, Amazon laid off 2,000 people, that's not always directly tied to their sales organization. And also, what's really hard to see if you're on the outside, especially if you're not already in the tech world, is there are new companies coming up like every day trying to disrupt like portions of these big companies. So Amazon does a ton of different things, obviously, but there are companies that if they just focus on this one component of cloud computing, they can actually do way better than Amazon. And so there's tons of these startups right now during these downturns where people are tired of paying very expensive prices for market leaders and premiums. They're really starting to consider alternatives. So just from a raw opportunity standpoint, maybe because some of these startups have died, there's not like as many just by sheer number of opportunities available. But the quality and the number of companies that are hiring will always be there, because if the market leaders are hurting, that means the people coming up are trying to grab their market share while they're down, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And then one other thing I wanted to talk to as well in terms of like impossible to break down, you're talking about from a personal standpoint, someone viewing the economy as negative. I think this is often lost, and what's really hard to understand. And using my own experience, I broke in as an engineer at the beginning of 2016. And I kid you not, like back then, the market had been on an incredible tear. 2008 happened, 2009 things like stabilized, and then 2010 to 2016, everything was just up and to the right. And people back then were like, are we in a bubble? Are housing prices too high? Are we on the cusp of another 2008? And I say that as an engineer who was like hesitant. And even though everything was great, I still was like, well, what if the market crashes? What if I switch over to sales and then the market tanks and I get laid off? And so my point being is, even though the market looks bad right now, even when it's good, do you actually think like you would really have a different opinion if you went on CNBC and saw like, markets are great, we're through the 2022 downturn, all these different things, right? And so that's what you have to ask yourself at a personal level. If that's enough, we can move on to the next one. But just
I'll actually add one more thing. So I think also like this is something that gets lost a lot, because people are always saying I should probably wait for the market to heat back up. But like honestly, you can't expect things to go like this all the time. That's when it is a bubble. Right? If things are continuing to go like this, when the broader economy, like it's not tech sales, right? Like when did this start? Like when did, this surge of like, layoffs start? It happened when the broader economy and the interest rates were like getting screwed. Yeah. So it's not tech sales, right? Like people love to blame that it's tech sales that's over, but this is just a result of the broader economy. And I would say it's really healthy that things have cooled down a little bit, but there's still plenty of opportunity. And I would say now is the best time to break in, because a year from now or a year and a half from now, when things start heating back up again, now you're in a prime position to take advantage of more venture capital money flowing around, more teams being opened up, more companies hiring. You now have tenure that you can actually leverage, right? Rather than getting in with all the college kids that have, and there's still plenty of college kids that are breaking in, but you can actually separate yourself now, be in a better position a year and a half from now. Anyway. Yeah, I'll stop it from there.
No, great point. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll double tap back into it too. And I think maybe also for that individual that's like skeptical of the economy and all these different reasons that may or may not be valid, what about that person that's on the fence that's like, well, what happens if I get into sales and don't like it?
Yeah. I think honestly, like, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, I so regret doing sales for a year. And I think you can talk to anybody who's like successful. And there's lots of people that end up going into sales and then leveraging that skill set in something else. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I think there's a lot of pros to staying in sales, right? But I think there's very few cons of trying sales out. Like the exposure that you get out of that is extremely valuable, right? The career itself is demanding. I'm not going to sit here and say it's like cozy as heck, but like for you, for instance, right? Like when you try something else where you don't have that upward mobility, where you aren't really being measured by your direct performance in the role, there's a lot of like, I would never take anything aside from sales, Just like knowing who I am as a person, like I value being able to move up quickly. I value seeing like, you know, my performance actually being rewarded. So again, like I don't want to get into like all the pros and cons of like sales or anything, but I don't think I've seen people say that it was a mistake to go into sales.
Yeah.
But I want to get your take on it, and then I'll kind of...
Yeah, I think a few different things, right? I agree. I think if you have a year of sales experience, let's take my case as an engineer. Like it's really hard to see on the outside looking in. Maybe you're young in your career or trying to break in. Like tech companies are probably more fluid than most, in the sense that if you get in as an engineer and you find yourself liking sales, they're like, sure, knock yourself out, right? That like you got to do the things to get there, but they're way more willing than say like a career in like banking or something where it's pretty rigid, it's pretty set structure. And to your point, I think what's really difficult for people to see is what an asset it can be when packaged correctly. Like the things you're going to have to do to break into tech sales will prepare you for future job hunts. They will not, and in addition to that, let's say you hate it, you go back to being an engineer. The fact that you understand what gets people to actually interact with you, you understand how customers actually articulate their problems without making this a separate episode in of itself, you will have such an enriched perspective having that customer facing experience, even if you hate it. It will just give you a better insight into, you know, how a business works, which is like such a generic thing to say, but it makes you really marketable, in my opinion, especially at the entry to mid-level, you know, where you're not like a 10-year experienced cloud architect or something crazy like that. It will only benefit you so long as you lean into it and you don't get there and play scared and then your foot's already out the door before you even gave it a serious try in the first place. But yeah, last thing I'd say on that too is like, a very real example, we had a student that actually hesitated late last year. They were in a safe financial career and they had the same hesitation. They were like, hey, I got a couple interviews. I really don't think this is for me. Like, appreciate it, but I'm just going to drop out. And we were like, hey, first of all, in like a week and a half, you got like 3 interviews with great companies. So I think you're out of your mind to say that it's not for you and you can't do it. 2, like genuinely too, like this person actually 3 months later got laid off, had to come back into the course, kind of just got forced into it. Now they're doing really, really well, fully remote job, killing it right now. And it also leverages their background in finance. It's a fintech company as well. Yeah. So anyway, no perfect answer, but some real world stories and context to like bring this to life. And if we're good on that one, we can definitely take, you know, kind of a broader look. I guess we kind of talked a lot about the economy. Maybe we just go ahead and move beyond that one into tech sales versus other fields. I think this is a really great one, maybe on that note of that student too, that was in that cushy, safe financial career, making, I think if I recall correctly, 72, 75. And then they're looking at, you know, tech sales jobs that are 75, 85, but it's not guaranteed. They're on the fence. Maybe aside from that specific example, I don't want to lead you too deep down the rabbit hole. What do people maybe that are potentially leaving something that they see as a valuable, safe career, what are the contrasts? What are the things that they should think about and what are they not aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think breaking into or transitioning out from any other field, like there's going to be a lot of worries, especially if you've already put in a significant amount of time. But I also think on the other side of that, there's a lot of like people that are, for instance, getting out of college for the first time or going into like corporate America or just corporate in general for the first time. Like they're obviously going back and forth. Either it's, you know, hey, this amount of time that I've put into my career right now, like, is it really worth to walk away from 5, 10, 15 years of experience and go into something brand new that I don't know much about? And the other side of that is, hey, I'm a fresh new grad. Like maybe I went to a great college or whatever else. I've got good grades. I can kind of like pick and choose, right? For me, I was going back and forth between investment banking, tech sales. I mean, I was pretty much optimizing for, I mean, what most people would optimize
dollars.
For. Yeah, like yeah. Dollars in your pocket, right? And upward mobility. Like those are the things that I was looking at. Yeah. And so in the end, that actually was the thing that, it wasn't the thing that ultimately, you know, made me decide on tech sales. And you were actually part of that entire thing, which was pretty fun. That's a whole story for another day. But I think that we've both been there. We've both had to really, really analyze this career before we went into it. And I would say while there are other great careers out there, I'm not going to say that tech sales is like the best career. I think it's the best career. I think it depends on what you're looking for, right? I would say for most people, based on what they're optimizing for, I could probably say that it's the best career. Yeah. But if you're like really not comfortable with getting into like, you know, these situations, I personally look at it as self-development in disguise. So like that, I always say that. I say that to their students all the time. So like there's 2 elements of it, right? The first one is I think you will grow immensely as a person going into this career. Like you will become more comfortable with having tough situations. And if you do decide to go into any other field apart from sales, you will at least take that with you,
Yeah.
Right. But even going apart from that, like if we just focus on what most people are actually looking for when they're looking at tech sales, which is like making money, growing my career, moving up, I don't think that there is a field that will reward you more than tech sales will, and in the shortest amount of time possible as well.
Yeah,
so
100%. Yeah, especially common themes too. It's like from my perspective, looking back at my own experience and a lot of people that I have helped, even before this platform existed, a lot of engineers in my network were like, "Oh, you switched over to sales. What was it like? Help them, et cetera, et cetera." But I think a lot of people that want to make this change, like at a fundamental level, sure, they want to increase their income, right? But I think many of them also want to kind of open the door to entrepreneurship. And this is, I think, one of the hardest things to understand on a couple of different fronts, right? Sure, sales is the most entrepreneurial type of job that you can have, and this isn't a blind endorsement. To your point, if you perform, you can progress very quickly. I think the flip side, aside from the playing it safe and not taking the chance, I think it's also look at the flip side, right? For the ability within 5 to 10 years to consistently make anywhere from $250 all the way to 700 to $1 million a year, which can be pretty common if you're in the right situation at the right time. I think the challenging thing to understand is the flip side of getting to that pay grade in any other career. And even forget the ones that don't even need a master's. Like you can get into investment banking if you go to a pretty solid school, you perform well and really network hard, you can break in with just an undergrad degree. But it is going to take you about 10 years plus to actually get to a salary band of like $500,000. And what it takes to get there is 12 to 18 hours a day for 6 to 7 days a week, your first 3 to 5 years there. And then after that, you peel back just a touch, but you're in office every day. You are probably minimum working 12 hours, and that doesn't include the extracurricular events you're going to in downtown New York, which, isn't all bad, right? If you're making $500,000 in New York, that's good. But the flip side is for that entrepreneurial person or that person that wants an out, and I say this because I'm gonna keep it very vague, but I fly to Wall Street basically every 2 to 3 weeks. Some of my biggest clients are there. I see people that are in this career path. They're approaching, 40 as an example. They've made it. They are making 500 to $1 million, in some cases $2 million a year. But this is the only thing they know. This is the only thing they can do. And the ability to start scratch from zero is so impossible that sure, if they truly plan and they have a big nest egg and they're willing to give themselves 2 years to figure it out, they can. But you have basically, all you have known is finance for 10, 15 years. If you truly want to start your own company, not only have you had to sacrifice any potential free time that an 8 to 10 hour workday would give you consistently, but also you haven't even learned sales in the first place, right? To even be able to do that from the ground up. So again, it's not that this path is even bad in the first place, but for that person that wants to progress quickly, kind of, maybe sure, you're not consistently W-2ing like over $1 million a year, but what is it worth if that takes 80 hours a week for 10 years versus the ability maybe 40 to 60 and some weeks even less in tech sales that you can clear 300 to 500 within 5 years and do that consistently. And not to mention, one last thing I'll end on is I have seen sales reps that because of this have the ability to build a real estate portfolio. They have an ability to build higherlevels.com like we do now that started as a passion project that has kind of turned into a business that we are pursuing. I even was on site in Phoenix recently and was talking to someone who used to work at Dell. They were telling me their manager kind of got 5 to 10 years into tech sales. They wanted to do something different. They wanted to mix it up. And they ended up becoming a realtor in Phoenix during like the boom. Like Phoenix, apparently not too familiar, boomed from like 2000 basically to 2008. He was there. He made more money working 2 to 3 days a week in real estate than tech sales. And aside from the skills required for that, my point being is if you're in that financial track or you're an accountant or you're an engineer and you finally get burnt out and maybe you do want to do real estate, you haven't learned anything about sales. You haven't learned anything about how to handle customer interactions. So I think the long-term leverage, so long as sales doesn't make you like depressed and like unable to get out of bed, but if you're on the fence, you've thought about it for a long time, like commit to learning it for sure. But also 5 years from now, if it ultimately doesn't work out, I think people often lose sight of how much easier it would be to actually do something different compared to many of these tracks. So yeah. I feel like I talked a ton, but
no, I think that's solid. And I think it, like to your point too, like I think it also bleeds into other areas of your life. Like, even if we move away from like the financial career and all those different things, or like doing anything career related, like you will be in positions like throughout your life where you will have to like have an idea, or not have an idea, but like you will be in procurement processes where you're evaluating different vendors. If you're building a house, like I'm going through this right now where, because I understand sales, right? Because I understand how these things are done, because I understand discounting levers, because I understand all these different things. I mean, to date, I've saved over $100,000 on my house, right? Which is like, that is substantial. Yeah. Like having knowledge of sales will give you a leg up in a lot of different areas, not just like going into business, right? Like just simple things that most people go through throughout their lifetime. Having an understanding of how sales work will give you an advantage in all those different areas. And I think like just make you a better person, make you more comfortable with like being in tough positions, having tough conversations, like things that you don't really think about, right? And I don't want it to turn too send, because I think a lot of people out there who are watching this are probably going back and forth on like, should I actually, go into tech sales? So we want to focus more on the tangible things, but I don't want that to, like, I don't want those elements to go untouched, because they are extremely important. Something that I underrated completely before I went into tech sales. I was so focused on the money, the dollar amount, and all these different things that I kind of forgot about all these things that I'm thinking about more and more now. Yeah. Right. So anyway, yeah.
No, that's a great one. I'm sure we could keep peeling it back. I think kind of related to is like this image, and maybe this goes out to kind of certainly people leaving that safe and cushy job, but also certainly more prestigious or traditionally strong backgrounds that see sales as like this slimy thing, or like they don't want to be associated with salespeople. The only thing I'd say before I get your thoughts first is like, that is definitely the case. And one of many anecdotes I'm sure we'll break down is like, when you first break into tech sales, I had engineers that reached out to me like, oh, hey, congrats. Like, guess you're going into sales now. I was like, yep. And they'll start talking trash in the beginning. And then like a year or two in, you're doing well, you get promoted a couple times, and it turns into like, oh, you're in sales? Like, how much do you make, man? How is that? So anyway, I'll pause there. I'll get your thoughts first, but yeah.
No, and I think that's funny, because I actually thought the exact same thing. I was like, I'm personally like an introvert. And so I'm not the type of person to, like, if you think of the typical salesperson, I can understand the hesitation, because it's like, it's somebody who's slimy, who's like trying to push you into a sale, who's like lying and all these different things. And I think that, SaaS is a very sophisticated industry, probably one of the most sophisticated industries in the world. And the people that you are interacting with are the opposite of that. Yeah. So you trying those strategies on that like ICP is not going to work, right? And so coincidentally, like, being in tech sales, you will become a different type of seller if you are successful, right? Because a seller that tries to be pushy and slimy is not going to work out in tech sales, right? Like, I've definitely heard bad stories of bad sellers in tech sales. I'm not saying that there's no bad sellers and people that aren't slimy or pushy, but I will say, like, that is the opposite of what works in tech sales. And it's more about like being consultative. It's more about like just being more of a normal human being. So I've come to realize that, honestly, like, me thinking a lot about not wanting to be that type of seller makes me like a more empathetic seller. It makes me like, I mean, I think that honestly, me and you are very different in the way that we sell. You're very, very direct, and I'm a lot more like becoming friends with people and like kind of like making them trust me, and they definitely trust you too. But I think like you don't have to be slimy or pushy. You just have to play into like how you like to sell, or like how you are as a person. And I think the worst thing that you can do is like trying to go out there, and we talk about this a lot, of like listening to LinkedIn gurus, like trying to change your style of like how you sell. I think like just be yourself, right? And that will shine through a lot more in how you have these conversations. So I think like I understand the hesitation 100%, but I think being aware of it will actually make you a much better seller than you think you will be. And you don't have to change your personality. You don't have to change like who you are as a person to be successful in this field. Like, if you are genuine, it'll shine through. People will respect that and like that a lot more than you trying to like copy the top 10 cold calling strategies and openers and different things. Like, that is the opposite of what will make you successful in tech sales.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like it's funny. It's a good analogy. Like, you see sports, and for I guess Americans watching, like, there's so many quarterbacks that have different styles that have won Super Bowls. I know, like, I'm just thinking because I recently was like watching a golf highlight on YouTube, and I played golf yesterday. But like, it's funny though, if and follow golf. Like, someone like Bryson DeChambeau is like super into the weeds analytically. He bulked up. He basically became like a human experiment, and is like down to the the height of the grass. He's like measuring everything. and he has won a couple of majors. And then you have other players that are not that technical. They have a completely different approach to the game, and they're equally, if not more successful. And so I think this is really hard to understand if you're on the outside looking in. To your point, I liked what you said, is like, yes, you have to learn a lot, and you will have to maybe shed some unproductive habits that get in the way of you just being an effective seller. But fundamentally, that doesn't mean you change your personality, right? Or fundamentally change who you are. And then one other thing I'd add too that I think is kind of on this topic a little bit as well. One of the things that I really enjoyed going from a hyper analytical career to something more like sales is on this note of being consultative and just like driving conversations. You learn and are, in my opinion, much more able to compartmentalize like what's serious and what's not. Like it's crazy some of the people I see in like higher education, and like respect to that. Like we need our neurosurgeons, we need, you know, people making like SpaceX rockets and whatnot. But I see like so many people that every single thing is like just the biggest deal in the world. And like like when I was an engineer, it's like you'll try and fix every problem regardless of if it actually means anything to the business. And I think not that it's a better or worse philosophy. Like I said, we still need those contrasting ideologies and types of thought, but it's interesting being on the other side, like how much when you really get into it is not a huge deal. And what a skill set, I think, going back to you building a house and learning how to do all these different things, when you can realize like what is most critical and what's not. It doesn't mean you can't solve all those things, but you're not going to let like the smallest of details like ruin your week. Like I feel like it can in engineering, and probably outside the scope of this, but I would also say politically as well. Kind of on this note, it's like when your promotion is set by a job that is not purely performance based, there's so many things that kind of become this weird game in of itself. And not that smashing your quota is a guaranteed way to get promoted, but more so than any other career, like the ability to be a salesperson and control your own destiny, you will get rewarded so much more directly for your performance. And going back to, actually knowing what's important, actually what's not. And super meta all the way back to my first comment, when 3 years, 5 years into your career, you're really enjoying it, you're really crushing it, and your friends who are engineers who haven't made the change or whatever are trying to talk trash like, oh, he's a sales guy. You don't even care, because it's like those comments don't even bother you. They're not even important. So that might be the most meta answer I've ever given on this pod. I hope it hit home. But yeah, anything else on that topic?
No. I mean, I think that pretty much encapsulates it. And I mean, I would just get as far away from that as possible. I think people who make that excuse are people who are trying to find every single reason as to why they're not doing tech sales in the first place. Yeah. Because, I mean, there are so many advantages. I think a lot of people are salty because they see salespeople make a ridiculous amount of money compared to them. And I'm not going to say, like, just because you go into sales, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah,
like, there's still work to be done, but, you've got to kind of, like, get away from all these like random things being mentioned on the internet, or like from people that aren't in sales, right? Like there's a reason why salespeople make a lot more money. It's not just because you're in tech sales. It's because it is actually like a tougher job, but it does come with significant rewards too. So
yeah, for sure. And maybe kind of in closing on one last point, for whether it's someone that's outside looking in, or I think someone that's 5, 6, 7 years into their career and kind of feeling burnt out, like I guess from both of our perspectives, the networking opportunities and the ability to maybe pivot. I know we touched on it a little bit, but I don't know, your thoughts on how to make the most of that. Any advice to someone out there that's listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I think just people need to realize like there's like, this is something that I didn't think about at all, but like the quality of the average person that I've met in tech sales is extremely high. I mean, we were comparing to investment banking, and this isn't necessarily like an investment banking versus tech sales or anything else. Investment banking is just like the closest thing in terms of like upward mobility, in terms of like pay. And so that's why we're kind of benchmarking toward it. You will meet really cool people in investment banking, but I will say, to your point too of like entrepreneurs, I think that like what I've noticed in tech sales is just like there's so many interesting people that go off and either like they'll go into like an adjacent field. Like I've had a couple friends that go into like selling yachts or like selling like really, really high-end luxury homes. We had somebody at Vanta actually who went off and are now selling like luxury homes. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's really hard to break into those industries, even if you are a real estate agent. Like if you're a real estate agent for 15, 20 years, you probably will never make it into like really, really luxury or high-end homes. And so for them to look at somebody who's selling software, like it's not looked down upon, right? It's actually the opposite of that. When somebody hears that you're selling software and you're really good at it, they're really interested in you because there's kind of like this outside glamorosity to that. It's kind of like this unknown thing, like this mysterious thing. And so it opens up a lot of doors for you. Like regardless of whether that you want to stay in tech sales or whatever else, it does make you a really, really interesting candidate for a lot of other things in the future. Yep. And the fluidity of it too, right? Like if you're selling cloud security, you can go sell like a real estate solution. And then a year after that, if you're tired of that, you can go sell another vertical. Yep. And all of a sudden you're now like, regardless of whether or not you think about it, you are in sales, but you're selling in a whole different vertical. Yep. So you can go from one field to the next as you please if you're good at what you do, right? And it's not like, I mean, sure, you have to learn the product, you have to learn the vertical, you have to learn the market, but you have that opportunity to do those things. Yeah. So I think, like, and I know I kind of spun off there a little bit, but I think definitely like something that people don't think about is who are you going to, like 5 years from now, when you look back at your career, like regardless of whether or not you guys are thinking about that out there right now, like you will surround yourself with a bunch of cool individuals, right? And those will be your friends, probably like for a very, very long time to come. Yep. So very, very underrated, like just advantage of being in tech sales is definitely the people that you're going to be surrounding yourself with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also on that note, like expanding upon a few of the things that you said and also contrasting that with like engineering, one of the really hard things to wrap your mind around is like, to your point, like you will always have to learn. It's not like you can jump from company to company and like day one be ready. Like there's a lot of ongoing and continual learning that you have to do in tech sales. However, contrasting that, like in engineering, for instance, I saw very quickly people who were at a company 5 to 7 to 10 years. And the first company I worked at, they had, I think it was like 3, 4, 5,000 different modules that you could use to collect like signals and all this electrical engineering stuff. We had people who were like gurus, like these chips or these modules that had thousands of chips on them. Like they knew the entire schematic, they knew all of these different things. And like if you get and become such a domain expert that is the only thing you know, I mean, sure, you're going to have some opportunities pop up, but if you've spent 10 years perfecting like a very, very small niche in any one thing, the possible opportunities to jump to something else at that same pay, if not more, and continue to progress your career, it is so much more limited than someone who generically has a skill set. Now, again, sure, the competition is going to be a little bit more fierce. So if you're an engineer, you might be out of work for 8 to 12 months. And when that one opportunity comes up, you're one of like 5 people in the world that knows something that deeply that could do that. There is more competition in tech sales. But again, I think it's just so many people on the fence that don't even try. Had they, actually done it, actually learned that they could be consistently in the top 10 to 20% of their organization and their peers, those people will always find jobs, right? And it's not to say that tech sales, like you'll never get laid off. Anyone with 10 plus years of experience has probably been pipped and or forced out of a company before. And that just is what it is. But I think both from a W-2 perspective, the long-term trajectory, the long-term ability, if you are good and learn and commit yourself to the craft, the ability to find employment from a safety net is there. And also what is lost, in my opinion, in many other careers, unless you literally just get tired of working at AWS as their best engineer and spin off like an AWS competitor, it's like, I mean, and good luck, right? But it's like your ability to then pivot to other companies, other industries, entrepreneurial endeavors. I think you have a very strong chance of surviving on tech sales, going the path of tech sales and going that route. Now, last thing I'd say is like, maybe this is a blind endorsement of tech sales. Obviously we're drinking the Kool-Aid, but at the same time, like if you're very technically savvy, if you're very good at what you do, like we need those people too. We need people studying STEM. I studied STEM. And I'd also say if you're at a point where maybe you're evaluating kind of that rigorous career path like investment banking, I think in the same way that tech sales gives you a hedge on your career, I would still advise you, if you have the aptitude and desire to study something intense in college, especially in undergrad, not committing like hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans for master's and PhD. Like I still think that STEM background, whatever track it is still very advantageous and still worth pursuing and gives you that hedge too, to where if you don't ultimately like it, you can go back. So anyway, I feel like we were just like 100% promotion there. I just want to bring us back to earth, but yeah.
No, and I mean, we are biased. Like we've been in tech sales. We've also done other things, though, and I feel like, we look at other people who are, like we have a lot of friends who do other things, right? And so I think like looking at them versus us and also looking at other people, not just like our own inner circles or whatever else, but I think like when you compare somebody who's on the tech sales path versus another path, it always ends up with some sort of regret, right? And I'm not saying every single person who goes into tech sales is like the happiest person in the world. There's a lot of people that quit tech sales that are like, screw this, right? But I will say, I think what most people are optimizing for, it definitely falls in line with what most people want. And I don't think anybody like grows up and is like, I want to sell software when I get older, right? I studied computer science. I thought I was going to be a software developer, and I was drawn in by the pay, all those different things. But ultimately, like, tech sales just kind of like, attracted me. And I think I would never regret going into tech sales, regardless of what I choose to do in the future. It's giving me such a cool skill set that I can apply it to anything else. That's the Zen side of it, right? And then also the pay is great, the upward mobility, working at the best companies in the world, not having to go through, and beat 25,000 other applicants or whatever else, right? So I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And I'd also like maybe end with this is, I think I see a lot of people out there that don't go into tech sales because there's somebody in their network that's like talking them away from it. And people that aren't in tech sales, that have no experience with tech sales or anything else. And so I think, if you're trying to go somewhere in life, if you're trying to change your life, if you're trying to change your career, do not take advice from people who aren't where you want to be, right? Instead, talk to people who are doing the things that you want to be doing or living the life that you want to be living, regardless if it's in tech sales or if it's any other industry, regardless of what you choose to go into or pursue. Like, listen to people who are doing things differently, that have already gone through like some of these hard choices, regardless if it's making or creating their own business or doing investment banking, tech sales, any other career field for that matter. I see a lot of people get deterred and kind of like being talked out of it because it's like, ooh, the industry in tech sales is not doing so great right now. I don't think you should be doing that, And they could be like making 65K as a real estate agent, struggling. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But if you are trying to optimize to have more freedom, make more money, get into a different stage of your life or state of your life, you should not be taking advice from people like that. You should be talking to people who have actively already done it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
For sure. No, great point. And yeah, I'm sure tons more we could unpack, but solid episode. And obviously, if anyone made it this far, we'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. We are self-funded here. We sponsor everything you see here ourselves. So we also run higherlevels.com, where there are reps at every level, both breaking in, SDRs, account executives that are at some of the best companies in the world, like AWS, Snowflake, Okta, et cetera. So if you are interested in training or looking for a community, definitely check that out. Nonetheless, we hope you enjoyed a lot of this. We are on Spotify too, if you're on the go, for future reference. And I don't know, can I plug anything else while we're still here?
No, I would just say, like, if you like the episode, I mean, to subscribe is awesome. Like, comment. We look at the comments pretty extensively. So like, if you like this type of content, let us know. We look at data, and that's sort of like how we dictate, what's next. What else should we create something cool on, or talk about, or discuss, or bring in other hosts, or whatever else. So let us know. But this was solid, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Appreciate it.